Hey, what's going on, guys? Welcome to the channel. At UFC Fight Night Noche, Alexa Grasso versus Valentina Shevchenko. We saw some horrendous performances, and I'm going to give you my opinion on who I think needs to be cut from the UFC after their performance at UFC Fight Night Noche. I'm going to start with some honorable mentions, then I'm going to get into my actual list, saving last on the list for who I believe most needs to be cut after UFC Noche. And honestly, number one on this list might be the most passionately I've ever felt about a cut in one of these videos. And honestly, I can't wait to get to my last two cuts in this video. Starting off with the first honorable mention, Daniel Lacerda. Daniel Lacerda fought Edgar Chairez to a no contest at UFC Fight Night Noche. And it appeared as if he was choked unconscious. He was in an anaconda choke up against the fence. It appeared as if he went out. The ref jumps in and stops it, and he just pops up and starts protesting immediately. They review it because they originally stopped it as a first-round submission win for Edgar Chairez. They review it. They say, oh, because he wasn't out, because he didn't tap, it is now a no contest. Now, I broke this extensively down in my post-fight, which I will link down in the description if you want to go check it out. I believe that Daniel Lacerda was out cold. I do believe that the referee actually made a perfect stoppage. And because it was such a perfect stoppage, Daniel Lacerda was held up by Edgar Chairez. Then immediately as the ref stops it and he releases the submission, he wakes back up, he's being held up, and then he starts protesting. Look at his eyes as the anaconda choke is released. He was out. In no world, in no universe, regardless of what Dominic Cruz and his horrible commentary says, do you, oh, I'm fighting an anaconda choke, let me just throw my arm limply against the cage and just wait it out. In no universe is that a defense of that submission. I believe he was out cold, and people have to realize that not every choke is John Jones versus Lyoto Machida, where you're just choked unconscious and dropped to the floor. Not every choke is like a movie, an action movie where the main character chokes out a villain and they just, oh, they're out cold for the next 35 minutes. That's not the way it works. Sometimes these guys can wake back up in an instant. We see it in flash KOs all the time. We see it in other submissions where people go out. They wake up immediately. They start protesting to the ref. They don't even realize because they haven't seen the replay. They were out cold. I believe that Daniel Lacerda was out cold, and I believe he deserved to lose this fight. And then you look at his overall UFC career. He's winless in his UFC career. He's lost 4 fights in the UFC. He's 0-4, plus now he has the no contest. So had he lost this fight, he would have been 0-5. He doesn't belong in the UFC. He lost to CJ Vergara. CJ Vergara ran for his life in the first round, pulled a Chelsea Chandler before Chelsea Chandler even pulled a Chelsea Chandler, but came back and won in the second round. Lost to Victor Altamirano, lost to Francisco Figueiredo, lost to Jeff Molina. Just loss after loss after loss after loss. Maybe they run it back. Daniel Lacerda is an exciting fighter, so I kind of give him a little bit of a leadway. That's why he's an honorable mention. But overall, I think he's 0-5 in the UFC. I think he needs to be cut from the organization. Moving on to my next honorable mention and my last honorable mention. And this one's actually going to be a bit controversial, but Kevin Holland. I think Kevin Holland is literally just showing up for a paycheck. I think he's unmotivated. I don't think he cares if he wins or loses. And honestly, the fight against Jack Della Maddalena, some people saying it could have went either way. I do think it was a close fight. It felt like Kevin Holland didn't care if he won. He didn't care if he lost. He just went out there to collect the paycheck. And I understand these guys have to get paid. But Kevin Holland, people hype him up. Oh, he'll take any fight. He'll fight on short notice. Because he doesn't care if he wins or loses. So what's the point of even being in the UFC? What's the point if he's just going out there? Imagine if an NFL team went out there. Oh, we don't care if we win or lose. We're getting paid. Imagine if that happened. Imagine if that level of effort happened. And that's Kevin Holland. He doesn't care. He just wants to take fight after fight after fight. Doesn't care if he wins or loses. He just wants to get paid. And fair enough, I hope the UFC is compensating him. But for us fans, watching that level of performance where had he upped the urgency just a little bit in that third round, because I thought Holland won the second round, he could have won that fight. But he just seemed like, oh, I don't want to get hit too much. I don't want to get injured at all because I want to take another fight a week or two from now. He's already calling out Neil Magny in his hairline, the guy who is accustomed to beating his small children. He's already calling out Neil Magny. I mean, that's worthy of a cut in itself. Kevin Holland got angry during media week when a reporter asked him why he didn't care about the belt. He doesn't care about the belt because all he cares about is getting matchups, fighting as soon as possible, fighting favorable matchups, and then winning or losing, he doesn't care. He'll just collect a paycheck. For me, I don't want to see that in UFC. I want to see guys who are motivated to win. I want to see guys who are motivated to move towards the top. Obviously, not everyone's going to be a champion, but Kevin Holland's just taking fights for the sake of taking fights. He has now become the Jessica Andrade of the welterweight division. She's just showing up for paychecks. Who wants to see that? And I understand he won his last fight against Michael Chiesa. I understand he won the fight before that against Santiago Ponzinibbio, which are decent wins, don't get me wrong. But the version of Kevin Holland that showed up against Jack Della Maddalena, it's just, he showed up to spar. He showed up literally to spar. That's it. And he's already calling out Neil Magny. He got a favorable matchup against Wonderboy Thompson. That was the best possible matchup he could get in the top 10 when Kevin Holland was unranked, got beat up, quit on the stool because of a broken hand against Wonderboy Thompson. Fight before that, stepped in on short notice against Khamzat Chimaev, absolutely got ragdolled and destroyed in that fight. And people always talk, oh, Kevin Holland's a BMF. He'll take any fight on short notice. That's because he doesn't care if he wins or loses. I believe every fight that Kevin Holland has taken on short notice has stepped in for somebody. He's literally lost the fight. So people are always like, oh, somebody called Kevin Holland. Oh, why? We might as well not have the fight because we already know he's going to lose. Kevin Holland at this point, he's still a fun fighter to watch. He doesn't care to win. He just showed up just to show up. I don't want to see that. I don't care about that. So that's why he's an honorable mention on this list. Moving on to my actual cuts list. Starting off with Alex Reyes. Alex Reyes lost to Charlie Campbell, got destroyed in the first round. And honestly, I feel bad for cutting Alex Reyes, but he hasn't won a fight since all the way back in August of 2017 against a guy who's 5-1. That's the last time he's won a fight. August of 2017. That is craziness. That is the last time he won a fight. And he's on a 2-fight losing streak. Charlie Campbell stepped in on short notice against Alex Reyes, starched him out in the first round. I just think Alex Reyes at 36 years old, he doesn't belong in the UFC. He just doesn't belong. I know he's faced a lot of adversity, and maybe they give him one more opportunity. I wouldn't feel bad about that, considering he was coming off such a long layoff. His last fight before this loss to Charlie Campbell was all the way back in September 2017. He took that fight on short notice. He was actually a co-main event on that fight night card. But the chin doesn't look very good. It looks like it runs in the family. I believe he's related to Dominic Reyes. And, he's 36 years old, 13-4 overall record, gets starched in the first round by a guy who took the fight on short notice. I just don't think he's UFC caliber. The barrier of entry just keeps getting lower and lower and lower in the UFC. And I think that Alex Reyes needs to be cut from the organization. Moving up on my list to my next cut, and that is Terrence Mitchell. Terrence Mitchell got absolutely wrecked by Raul Rosas Jr., starched out cold in the first round, flash KO'd initially, then Raul jumps on the full mount, ends up getting his back, flatten him out, pounds him out in the first round, finishes him in the first minute of the first round, and this isn't the first time Terrence Mitchell's been dominating the UFC. The fight before this made his UFC debut against Cameron Saman, and in that fight got dominated in the first round and finished in the first round as well. And I know there's a lot of hype behind Raul Rosas Jr. He's 18 years old. He's very low-level MMA right now. He looks very promising. He has excellent grappling. Terrence Mitchell couldn't even go out there and strike with him in any capacity. Every shot that he threw was landing on nothing but air. And the fact that you look at his age, he's 33 years old in the bantamweight division. You look at some of his wins before he came into the UFC. A guy who's 4-1, a guy who's 4-2. 3 fights ago, he beat a guy who's 3-3. He's not UFC caliber. Terrence Mitchell's not UFC caliber. He's fought 2 guys, 2 prospects in Cameron Saman and Raul Rosas Jr., who kind of are maybe future contenders in the UFC bantamweight division. He's getting starched badly. So I don't want to see Mitchell take any more damage against the low-level competition in the bantamweight division who are kind of on the rise. And the UFC knew exactly what they were doing here. They were setting Terrence Mitchell up for failure, but he doesn't belong in the UFC. He took the Saman fight on short notice. He took the Raul Rosas Jr. fight. He had to know what the UFC was doing here, but he just doesn't belong in the UFC. I know the barrier of entry keeps just slipping down lower and lower, but honestly, it's just a slippery slope, and Terrence Mitchell is like under bottom of the barrel level talent for the UFC. And if we keep letting this happen, it's only going to get worse and worse and worse. And next thing you know, we're going to see Terrence Mitchell's infiltrate a pay-per-view main card. I don't want to see that happen. Terrence Mitchell doesn't have the skills to fight in the UFC. He needs to be cut from the organization. Moving up on my list to my next cut, and that is Marnik Mann. She fought on short notice against Josephine Canuzzo. Honestly, I want to cut Josephine Canuzzo just for not getting the finish in this fight. She loses. Marnik Mann just got absolutely dominated. Lost 30-27. Didn't have any striking. Didn't have any grappling. And I know she took it on short notice, but the skills just aren't there. She looks like she's being held at gunpoint and forced to fight. She looks scared in there. She reminds me of that heavyweight that Greg Hardy fought years ago. Some Russian guy who just looked terrified to be in the cage. That's the way she fights. And overall, she's only 30 years old, but she's 6-2. She had an opportunity on Dana White's Contender Series, got starched out by Bruno Brazil. In her last fight, she fought a girl who's 7-6, got a win there via decision. It's not like she's starching super low-level competition outside the UFC. She's barely winning those fights as well. And then she comes in against Josephine Knudsen, who I believe came in on short notice as well, and just gets dominated. And honestly, Knudsen should have been able to finish her. She hurt her badly. I believe it was in the second round. Marnik, man, this list in general, UFC Noche, talk about some super low-level fighters. And, Alex Reyes is one thing, hasn't fought in a while. He looked okay. He looks like he has some skills. But when you get up to Marnik, man, you're talking about literally pulling bums off the street. That's what you're talking about. I might bet on a hobo pulled off the street against Marnik, man, in a MMA fight. That's how low level she is. I don't want to watch her on any card ever again. I really don't. She doesn't belong in the UFC. Cut her from the organization. I'm tired of seeing this low bar of the UFC just keep getting lower and lower and lower just for the sake of output. She doesn't have the striking. She doesn't have the grappling. She doesn't even have the stamina. Cut her from the organization. Moving up on my list to my second to last cut, which honestly, any other fight card, this might have been number one. But that is Dominick Cruz on commentary. Dominick Cruz is one of the worst UFC commentators. He's right up there with Bisbang and the declining Joe Rogan. Dominick Cruz, first off, he has an axe to grind against every referee. I think it's because he hates Keith Peterson for the supposed early stoppage against Henry Cejudo, which was, in his defense, a hair early. But the whole fight, he's just, he's criticizing the referee, Chris Tione, for the stoppage in the Daniel Lacerda fight, which actually I thought it was a fine stoppage. And he's acting like, oh, Herb Dean wouldn't have done that when Herb Dean's made a million mistakes in the past. He's giving out false information on the broadcast. He's setting false narratives. He's talking about in the main event, oh, well, you're allowed to knee a downed opponent if they don't have enough weight on their hand, which isn't actually written in the rules. He may have been told that in the locker room, but he acted as if that was written in the rules that way, and it's just not. I checked. It's flat out not. So he's given false information on the rules, but the number one thing that Dominick Cruz does that absolutely grinds my gears, and he's done this probably 50 times at this point. Every time he's on commentary, he sets a narrative about the scoring criteria and the judging criteria that is just demonstrably false. And he convinces fans that this is true, and it drives me nuts. It literally drives me nuts to the point anything to just mute Dominick Cruz, because the commentary is horrible. What he does is he'll watch a fighter win the first 2 rounds. Then when talking about the losing fighter in the third round, he'll say, they really need to get a cut in this third round and they can win this fight. He thinks that judges look at later rounds and score damage in later rounds and go back and revisit earlier rounds and rescore those rounds. He thinks a nasty cut in the third round makes a judge change their score for the first round. He's alluded to this multiple times. Sanko has corrected him. DC corrected him yesterday. He was acting like, oh, Kyle Nelson, he's busted up in the third round, so that might play into account for the first round. Or he was making all different types of comments, and he does this time and time again. Let me just say this for anyone who doesn't know. The fights are scored round by round. Whatever happens in the third round doesn't matter what happens in the first round. Whatever happens in the second round doesn't matter what happens in the fourth round. He acts like any fighter can win any fight by cutting someone open in a fight. Oh, all the rounds are now changed and they're scored in their favor because they cut you open in the fourth round. So now even though that fighter who got cut open won the first 3 rounds, they're changing the scorecards. No, the judges score fights round by round. At the end of the first round, they write down 10-9, 10-8, whatever it may be, and then they move on to the next few rounds. Dominick Cruz does not get that. He is brain dead. I don't know if Marlon Chito Vera just gave him too much CTE with that head kick, but he was doing it before that. And then I think back to the Khabib Nurmagomedov versus Conor McGregor fight. Conor McGregor is on the verge of being TKO'd, and Dominick Cruz is like, yeah, this is Conor McGregor's plan here. He's trying to gas Khabib out by almost getting TKO'd in the second round. He just says stupid stuff. He doesn't realize what's going on. He doesn't understand the scoring criteria. And he acts as if damage is only visible damage. So he thinks a bloody nose can win you an entire round. He doesn't realize there is concussive damage. And he does this time and time again. And there's fans out there that don't understand. They listen to Dominic Cruz. They're like, oh, he must know what's going on because he's a fighter. He has no idea what's going on. He is an idiot. He's brain dead. He's CTE ridden. I want him off commentary immediately. Can you imagine if we got an event where we had Dominic Cruz, Michael Bisping, and Joe Rogan? Oh my, could you imagine what would be said? Could you imagine? Dominic Cruz needs to be cut from commentary immediately. Moving on to my last cut. And I don't think I've ever felt this passionately about a cut in one of these videos. And I'm wondering how many of you guys have already guessed my number one cut. But that is UFC judge Mike Bell, who works for the Nevada State Athletic Commission. He turned in an indefensible scorecard in the main event. He needs to be fired immediately. His family needs to disown him. Someone needs to... No, you know what? I wouldn't recommend somebody sucker punching him in the parking lot at the T-Mobile Arena. I mean, that would be an absolute shame. Okay, that would be an absolute shame if someone sucker punched Mike Bell in the T-Mobile Arena parking lot. Okay? Mike Bell turned in an indefensible scorecard in the main event that resulted in the fight being a draw. In round 5, you had Valentina Shevchenko outstrike Alexa Grasso for 3.5 minutes. Then she fails on a head and arm throw. She ends up giving up her back, eating some ground and pound, and then Alexa Grasso looks for a rear naked choke. There are some people that gave the 5th round to Alexa Grasso based on the takedown and the ground and pound and the rear naked choke for the last minute and a half. The actual ground and pound that was done lasted about 20 to 30 seconds. I would say more than 50% of it landed on the forearms or glove of Valentina Shevchenko. I personally gave the 5th round to Valentina Shevchenko for the work that she did in the first 3.5 minutes. But if you want to have a debate and say, oh no, I scored it for Grasso, that is fine. That's not what I'm here to litigate here in this video. There is no way, shape, or form you can give that round a 10-8 for Alexa Grasso, which means utter domination for the entirety of the round. That is what Mike Bell scored that round. He said that Alexa Grasso dominated Valentina Shevchenko so badly in the 5th round that she needed to get a 10-8. And people are defending this. There's some people saying, oh, Mike Bell is historically an excellent judge and he does a great job and turns in amazing scorecards. I don't care. This is so indefensible. He needs to be fired. He absolutely needs to be fired. It's an indefensible scorecard. If you told me, oh, this pilot, you're going to get on this plane. This pilot's one of the best pilots ever. There's going to be no turbulence. The plane's going to be spotless. You're going to have a great takeoff, great landing. But the thing is, every once in a while, you know, he gets a wild hair up his ass and he jumps out in a parachute and just crash lands the plane into the side of a mountain and everyone dies in a fiery crash. If you told me that happened once in a while, I'd be like, you know what? I'm never getting on that guy's plane. I don't care how good of a pilot he is. I don't care that Mike Bell has a history of being a competent judge. This scorecard is indefensible unless Mike Bell comes out and says, look, I had a medical event in the 5th round. I didn't know what was going on. I didn't realize it at the time. I was having a stroke and I tried to do my job to the best of my ability and I got it wrong. Okay, fine. That is fine. That is an excuse I will accept. Anything short of that, he needs to be fired. This needs to be fixed. This needs to be overturned. That is not a 10-8 round. There's no argument to be made that is a 10-8 round for Alexa Grasso. And if not for that 10-8 round, Valentina Shevchenko wins the women's flyweight title. She's your new champion. But instead now, because the other two judges, one had it for Grasso, one had it for Shevchenko, 48-47, Mike Bell comes in, scores it 47-47 because of the 10-8. Just a horrible scorecard. And Mike Bell should never score another fight again. He needs to find a new career. And I know the UFC doesn't necessarily have the ability to fire Mike Bell, but they have the ability to put pressure on the commission and say, look, we don't want this guy as a judge. We look what they did to Steve Mazzagatti. They didn't want him as a referee anymore. Now he's on the sidelines wearing a striped shirt every event. So I really think that Mike Bell needs to be held accountable. He needs to be penalized. He needs to be, you know, let him do the little clapper for now on. You know, if they're in Australia, let him honk the little horn. You know, I know he's working for the Nevada State Athletic Commission, but sometimes those guys travel. I don't want to see Mike Bell rendering any scorecards. Is he the same guy that scored it for Chito Vera against Corey Sandhagen? Because that was a horrible scorecard as well. But to give out a 10-8 in a round where the person getting the 10-8 arguably lost the round is some of the worst judging I've seen in my entire life. Some of the worst judging that I've ever seen. I can't think of a worse scorecard off the top of my head right now. So Mike Bell needs to be cut. Never judge a fight again. I don't want him judging anything. I don't want him judging high dives at a swim competition, okay? I do not want him judging anything. I don't want him judging a spelling bee. I don't want him anywhere where where he has to make informed decisions, okay? I don't want Mike Bell anywhere. He needs to be fired. He needs to retire. I don't know how old he is, but he's done. He's done. This is indefensible. 10-8 for Alexa Grasso in a round she arguably lost. What was he watching? Did he smoke crack before that round? What was he watching? And at round 4, he scored for Valentina Shevchenko, which I don't think is horrible. I think you could give round 4 to Valentina Shevchenko, but arguably that round should have went to Grasso, but we're splitting hairs there. But round 5, no matter how you feel about round 5, you show me somebody who scored round 5, 10-8 for Grasso. Anybody who's watching this video right now, you need to seek medical help. You need to see a therapist immediately. There's something wrong with you, or you need to visit an eye doctor. That's the only other thing I can think of. So Mike Bell, cut him, fire him immediately. He never needs to judge another fight again, let alone a championship fight. Now, as far as who will actually get cut from this list, I think Terrence Mitchell gets cut. I think Marnik Mann gets cut. Dominic Cruz isn't going to get cut, but hopefully they have him on less commentary gigs in the future. Alex Reyes is 50-50. I don't think Daniel Lacerda or Kevin Holland will get cut. So there you go. Basically, Terrence Mitchell, Marnik Mann gets cut for sure. I'm pretty sure. I would say I'm 90% sure of those cuts. Alex Reyes, I would say 50-50. Could get cut, may not get cut. Let me know what you guys think of the list down in the comments. Don't forget to like the video. Don't forget to subscribe, and thank you so much for watching.